The Nissan Cube's oriental quirky character will divide opinion, but its boxy charms are certainly a refreshing change in the small car sector. Like the bodywork, the cabin offers something completely different, and it's big on practicality. Bolder fashion-conscious buyers could find it right up their street. Hip to be square? Nissan certainly seem to think so. Since their curious little super mini-sized Cube first appeared just before the turn of the century, they've sold over 1 million first and second generation versions, and seen the boxy little shape copied by just about every other Japanese brand. So yes, it may be oddball, but it certainly isn't limited in its appeal. Not in the Far East anyway. The roads of Tokyo, Bangkok and Hong Kong are full of these things. But this third generation version is the first to be offered to braver and more eccentric British buyers looking for a small car with a big personality. This model's predecessor was named in the Design Museum's list of 50 cars that changed the world. Though the underpinnings are familiar, the parts that matter, the everyday bits you look at inside and out, offer a completely different take on small car motoring. You may not like it, but it's a sushi kind of thing, designed primarily for the East, but refreshingly different for the few Europeans prepared to try it. Cartoon looks suggest a cartoon driving experience, but not a bit of it. According to Nissan, this is a lounge, not a cabin, and in keeping, the whole feeling that you get at the wheel is smooth, laid back and languid. So the ride's springy, the seat's squashy. Sportiness would, after all, be both redundant and ridiculous in a car of this kind. So it comes as something of a surprise when you do venture gingerly out onto a twisting secondary road that body roll is actually relatively well controlled and grip quite up to normal Super Mini standards. Shouldn't be that much of a surprise, in truth, since under the skin the steering, suspension and engines are all exactly the same as Nissan's slightly larger and more conventional take on the boxier theme, their Note Super Mini MPV. Just like the Note, this car uses not only the 110 brake horsepower 1.6 litre petrol engine that I'm driving here, but also a frugal 1.5 litre DCI diesel. The petrol version feels sprightly enough in the 4 or so seconds it takes you to reach 30 miles an hour, but has to be revved pretty hard to achieve meaningful progress thereafter. Rest to 60 actually takes 11.3 seconds. And overtaking usually requires at least more than one down change. Refinement is pretty good with both units, which is just as well, since that bluff shape is always going to generate wind noise to some extent. The light steering, so pleasant around town, isn't ideal on the open road either, but then how often are you going to be cruising at high speeds for any length of time with this car? More relevant perhaps is the fact that ducking and diving around town is as easy as parking when you do finally find a tiny space. It's all down to what Nissan calls this model's stress-free driving experience. Visibility is the key word here. It's clearly been an overriding passion with the designers who put in place a more upright front screen and driving position than you'd normally find in such a small car. It feels strange at first until you realise that this whole design approach minimises the invisible length of the stubby bonnet. You know, that bit that you can't see and you're forced to guess at when you're parking or when you're judging gaps in traffic. It also helps that the rear D-pillar on the passenger side is slimmer. Yes, it looks odd, but it's really helpful in minimising the blind spot that you get in a conventionally styled little car when you're either reversing or when you're changing lanes. The Nissan Cube's quirkiness is at least partially explained when you learn more about the people behind it. The design team apparently pictured a bulldog wearing sunglasses in creating this quirky shape. Yes, really. So these elongated headlamps stretching across the front to the centre grille that joins them together are the sunglasses, while the chunky shape with its 4 square stance, it does have a hint of bulldog if you squint a little bit. What's certainly true is that, and really noticeable, is that despite its boxy looks, There aren't really any sharp corners anywhere on this car. All its extremities end in soft curves, helping to create its cuddly persona. And inside? Well, welcome to what Nissan calls the Jacuzzi Lounge. The sofa-style rear bench arranged in what the designers call a jacuzzi curve. Now the seat itself, reclinable for greater comfort, is broad and soft. The idea apparently being to create the feeling of sitting on a sofa with water lapping around you. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But the overall effect is actually rather calming in an out there hippie sort of way. The dashboard is wave-shaped and the general design is geometric, supposedly inspired by the circular ripples that spread when a drop hits a pool of water. This ripple effect roof lining, for example, echoed by the circles used to create cup holders, loudspeakers and so on. At the wheel, you sit erect and high with a reasonably comfortable driving position, despite the fact that the steering wheel isn't reach adjustable. There are lots of practical touches: cup holders, coat hooks, shelves, even multicoloured rubber bands on the door armrests that you can secure items like a mobile phone to. Despite all the design eccentricity, it's actually all rather practical, as perhaps you'd expect it would be given the boxy dimensions. True, it's not as big as Nissan's Note Super Mini MPV, but it feels as if it is, thanks to the taller stance and this large glass panoramic sunroof. Now, to some extent, this is an illusion. Rear seat space isn't actually that great unless you push back the clever sliding rear seat, minimising boot space that varies between 255 and 403 litres. The upper figure, of course, requires the folding down of the split folding rear seats. I say folding, actually the backrest merely flops down on the rear seat base, leaving a huge step in the load floor. Another thing you'll have to get used to is the fact that there's a rear door rather than a rear hatch. It's side hinged and opens like a fridge. Unusual, but not ideal if you're parked against a wall. List prices suggest that you'll be paying somewhere in the £14,000 to £16,500 bracket for your Nissan Cube. Now that sounds expensive until you learn that, in terms of list price anyway, that sort of budget would only buy you a plush version of a fairly ordinary Super Mini, a Renault Clio with the same engines, for example. Harder for Nissan to explain is just why their larger Note, with the same engines and much more luggage space, is £3,000 cheaper model for model. You've really got to want the Cube's trendiness. The Note is one of those small but practical Super Mini MPVs, a sector that could provide buyers for this car from families wanting something a little less worthy and dull. But equally though, you could see buyers coming from people who had previously owned chic and trendy cars like a Mini or a Fiat 500 in the past, but now want something slightly more practical. Under the bonnet, you've got a choice of the 1.6 litre 110 brake horsepower petrol engine that I've got here, or an 86 brake horsepower 1.5 litre diesel. Now, whichever version you choose, you'll need to be comparing it to a really top spec conventional Super Mini for the value proposition to really add up. So it's just as well that this Cube comes pretty well equipped. All versions get this panoramic glass roof with a rice paper inspired blind to go across it, don't ask. Rear privacy glass, Bluetooth compatibility for your mobile phone and cruise control. Top spec models like this one also add Nissan's Connect audio and navigation system with a built-in rear parking camera, and you also get full climate control. Whichever version you choose, you'll find 6 airbags and stability control fitted as standard. Nissan's 1.6 litre 110 brake horsepower petrol engine gives the Cube emissions as low as 151 grams per kilometre of CO2 and combined fuel economy as high as 42.8 miles to the gallon. The only decision is whether to choose the sharp shifting manual transmission or opt for Nissan's advanced CVT. Go for the frugal 1.5 litre diesel and you can expect to cover around 20 more miles for each gallon and shave around 30 grams per kilometre off the CO2 figure. Insurance is Group 15 on the 1 to 50 scale, and there's a 3-year 60,000 mile warranty. You won't be buying a Nissan Cube because you want a small shopping car. Even if it was more affordable, its sheer stop in the street, in-your-face factor would alienate many. But then Nissan has its Micra for mainstream customers. This is a flight of fancy, and a rather refreshing one. You really don't have to win the lottery to startle the neighbours and stop traffic in the high street. So you'll buy this car because you want to be unique. And you'll be pleased that it's an acquired taste, because if everyone who wanted to be unique bought one, then, well, it wouldn't be unique anymore. Anyway, one thing's for certain, Nissan has been thinking outside the box with this car. And thanks, in part, to its global success, being square has never been more fashionable.